So what was the turning point for you where you actually felt that you wanted to be a part of the band? And
I never wanted to be a part of the band, initially.
So how did it happen?
Well, that could be this entire interview. You want to really get into...
Let's get into it.
I mean, it's a long story. Well, I'll give you the abridged version. So eventually we became friends, and we shared studio space because we were all broke. You know, none of us had money. We were scraping by like $100, $150 a month to pay for studio rent between two bands. And more often than not, the door was locked for us when we went to practice because System didn't pay their half, you know? And then through time, you become friends with people. And we did, you know, we had a good relationship. We would go hang out, have a beer together occasionally, and really just talk about music, talk about what our dreams were, our aspirations were. And I slowly developed closer and closer ties to the guys. They slowly had more and more issues with their drummer, who was a fantastic drummer, Andy. I'm sure you're familiar with him. And a great artist in his own right, you know, and also played with Dave. Like, all the pieces come together again. And it became clear that they were no longer going to be compatible, you know. But when you're in those situations, it's very much like having a friend and they have a girlfriend that you admire, and you're, you know, more often than not, you say, okay, well, I would like to date someone like that person, you know? But this became a situation where the other three members, although they didn't know it, had all approached me within a 1-year period and asked me that if Andy was no longer in the band, would I join the band? I was very committed to my band, although we didn't have a singer and didn't have one for over a year, you know. But I still felt a lot of loyalty, and we built something that I was proud of. You know, I really liked our music back then, and I was loath to take someone else's position, you know, especially Andy, who I liked, who I admired as a musician and as a person. So I told him no, I declined, you know. So it was never my intention to join System, but like all things that are meant to be, circumstances lead you to the position that you're supposed to be in. And then the decision is no longer yours. You know, so that's kind of what happened. Andy got into an argument with somebody's boyfriend or something. You know, he was having his own issues, so I won't get into it. But that led to him getting arrested. You know, there was it's a long story. But anyway, suffice it to say, a month later, I was supposed to appear in court with Andy, and I was waiting in the morning to be picked up. And I got the bad news that he broke his hand punching a wall. So this is also simultaneously happening when System is being courted for a record deal. You know, so it was a difficult time for this to happen. And I was entrusted with the job of letting the guys know that, hey, your drummer broke his arm or hand or whatever it was. So back then we didn't have cell phones. So I paged the Chavo, you know, 911. And he called me back. He was with Darren at the time, somewhere. And I said, bro, I hope you're sitting down. I have some bad news for you. And he's like, oh, you know, if you know Chavo, you know, like this pretty much describes his reaction, right? Like, what's going on? And I said, Andy broke his hand. And then I heard Chavo repeat what I had told him. And then I heard kind of sadistic kind of laughter in the background a little bit, right? And then Darren yelled, ask John if he'll join the band, you know. So I was like, okay, that's not the reaction I expected, but all right. And then the next day we got together, we had a meeting, the four of us, and they said, look, there's a worst time in the world. Andy's gonna be out for 6 months. You know, his arm was like this for like 4 at least. And we have all this attention from the labels. We can't stop now. You know the songs. You're in the studio half the time when we're rehearsing. You got to cover for Andy. And that was what I thought it would be initially, is that I would go in and I would cover, and then when Andy was better, he'd come back, and I go back to my band, you know? So I basically, rehearsing with System, I told you it was a long story. I was basically rehearsing with System and my band, whatever we were called at that time. We had like 5 names at the same time. So, you know, a lot of work for me. And then a couple of days in, it was just so obvious that it was meant to be. I played a little bit faster than Andy. I've always been ahead of the beat a little slightly, you know, which gives kind of an uncomfortable but good feeling to the music. And it just worked, and it was undeniable. And even my guitar player, after watching our second rehearsal, said, you know, he just kind of went like this and walked out of the room, you know, because he knew.
Yeah.
So then it was the next uncomfortable conversation of the guys saying, look, we think this is the right four piece for this band. This is what we want to move forward with. And we love you and we get along with you. We just don't get along with Andy. You know, a couple of the members they couldn't make it work with him. And he would have eventually been thrown out of the band, in my opinion. You know, and I'm not saying that's an excuse of why I decided to join. I had a very hard time with that decision. It took me something like 5 days to finally come to the decision. But in the end, as much guilt as I had, I knew it was the right thing to do. So that's pretty much the story of how I joined the band. So technically, I never really joined the band.